In a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, the Miller family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Mark, the father, worked long hours as an IT manager. Laura, the mother, ran a small home bakery. Their two kids, Ethan, 15, and Sophie, 10, spent most evenings behind screens, barely talking except to argue about Wi-Fi speed. Dinner had turned into a ritual of silence. Mark scrolled emails between bites. Laura cleaned as she ate. Ethan wore headphones, and Sophie talked to her tablet. No one fought loudly, but no one really talked either. One Sunday, Laura dropped a tray of cupcakes while rushing to finish an order. The frosting splattered, the timer beeped, and Sophie yelled from the living room, "Mom, the Wi-Fi's down again." Laura snapped, "Can't you see I'm busy?" The words echoed through the house, sharper than she intended. Sophie ran to her room. Ethan slammed his door, and Mark stayed silent. Later that night, Laura sat on the couch staring at the quiet house and whispered, "We all live here, but it doesn't feel like home anymore." That sentence lingered in her mind. The next morning, Laura decided something had to change. Not overnight, but intentionally. She took out her old family journal, wiped the dust off, and wrote on the first page in big letters, "Project Home, How to Be Happy Together Again." She didn't know what that meant yet, but it was a start. The next morning, Laura woke up earlier than she had in months. She made pancakes, brewed coffee, and set the table for 4. She wanted to start small, one breakfast where everyone sat down together. When Mark came downstairs, half awake and already checking his work phone, she smiled and said, "Sit down. Let's eat as a family today." He raised an eyebrow. "We haven't done that in forever." "Exactly," she said, sliding him a plate. Ethan stumbled down next, earbuds in, hoodie up. "I'll just grab something later." "Nope," Laura said firmly. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Sophie wandered in, clutching her tablet. "Can I just watch something while I eat?" "Not today," Laura said softly. "Let's talk instead." The table went quiet. The only sound was the ticking clock and the sizzle from the pan. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "How's school, Ethan?" Ethan shrugged. "Fine." Sophie kicked her feet under the chair. "We're doing a project on animals." "That's cool. Which one?"
"Penguins," she grinned. "They stick together forever." Laura smiled at that. "Maybe we can learn something from penguins." Ethan rolled his eyes, but even he smiled a little. Breakfast lasted only 10 minutes, but when everyone left the table, the air in the house felt different. Not fixed, not perfect, but warmer. That night, Laura wrote in her journal, "Step 1, bring them back to the table. Happiness starts where connection begins, even over burnt pancakes." It wasn't a miracle moment, but it was the first heartbeat of family returning to life. And she promised herself there'd be a next breakfast and 100 more after that. That Friday evening, Laura gathered everyone in the living room. The TV was off, the lights dim, and she held her Project Home notebook in her lap. Mark looked cautious. "What's going on?" Laura smiled nervously. "I want us to start spending time together again, not just living under one roof, actually being a family." Ethan groaned. "Mom, please don't make us do family game night or something." "Actually," Laura said, grinning, "that's exactly what I was thinking." Sophie clapped her hands. "Can we play Monopoly? I always win." Mark laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "I remember the last time we played that. Ethan flipped the board." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, because you bought every property, Dad." It was small, but there it was. the sound of laughter. Laura's heart felt lighter. Saturday night, they gathered around the dining table, phones stacked in a bowl by the door, snacks on the side, a board game in the middle. At first, it was awkward. Mark kept checking his watch. Ethan half smiled like he was too cool to enjoy it. But soon something changed. Sophie made a dramatic, rich person voice every time she collected rent. Ethan couldn't stop laughing. Mark started getting competitive. And when Laura landed in jail for the third time, she threw up her hands and said, "Figures, even in Monopoly, moms don't get a break." The whole family burst out laughing, real, warm, contagious laughter. Later that night, after the game ended and the kids went to bed, Mark turned to Laura. "You know, that was nice. I forgot what this felt like." Laura smiled. "Me too." That night in her journal, she wrote, "Step 2, make time sacred. Happiness doesn't just happen. You schedule it, protect it, and show up for it." It wasn't about Monopoly. It was about something deeper. Rebuilding the muscle of togetherness, and slowly the Millers were learning to use it again. The next week brought new energy into the Miller home. Laughter returned in small bursts, shared jokes, quick hugs, even music playing softly in the kitchen again. But peace, as Laura knew, didn't mean everything was healed. Some things still sat under the surface, words left unsaid, moments unacknowledged. One Sunday afternoon, after cleaning the kitchen, Laura found Ethan sitting outside on the porch, scrolling through his phone. She joined him quietly. "Hey," she said, "you've been quieter lately. Everything okay?" He shrugged. "You and Dad are trying too hard." "Trying too hard to what?" "To pretend we're this perfect family again. It's weird." She sighed. "You're right. We're not perfect, Ethan. But I don't want us to keep pretending we're fine when we're not." He looked up, unsure how to respond. So she said what she'd been holding in for a long time. "I know I wasn't there enough last year. I was always working, stressed, distracted. I should have listened more. I'm sorry." Ethan's expression softened. He didn't expect that. After a long pause, he said, "Yeah, I was kind of a jerk too. Sorry for always hiding in my room." Laura smiled, eyes glistening. Apology accepted. Inside the house, Mark overheard through the window, and something in him cracked open too. That evening, he called Sophie into the living room. "Hey, champ. Sorry I missed your school play last spring. I told myself work couldn't wait, but it could have." Sophie climbed into his lap and hugged him tight. "It's okay, Daddy. You can come next time." That night, Laura wrote in her journal, "Step 3. Apologies heal more than arguments ever could. Happiness grows where pride ends." The Millers weren't just spending time together anymore. They were learning to see each other again. And that, Laura thought, was how families truly start to heal. A few weeks after those first apologies, Laura realized that progress had made the Millers kinder, but not yet connected. Everyone was doing better individually, but they still weren't listening to each other. So one Sunday afternoon, she called for something they hadn't done in years, a family meeting. "Do we have to?" Ethan asked, flopping onto the couch. "Yes," Laura said firmly. "No phones, no distractions, just us talking, like an actual family." Mark looked amused but supportive. "All right, boss, what's the agenda?" Laura smiled. "I don't have one. I just want us to talk about how things are going, honestly." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Sophie spoke first, swinging her legs. "I like when we eat breakfast together now, but Ethan always takes the last pancake." Ethan laughed. "Because you take forever to eat." Laura shot him a playful glare.
Rule 1 of this meeting, no interrupting. Ethan leaned back. Fine, then I'll say something too. I actually don't hate these family things anymore. It's kinda nice. Laura blinked. Did my son just admit to enjoying family time? He shrugged, hiding a grin. Don't get used to it. Then Mark spoke up. You know, I didn't realize how much I'd checked out until lately. Work was easier than home, but I missed this. Laura's eyes softened. Then let's make sure we don't lose it again. They spent the next hour talking about what everyone wanted. More dinners together, fewer arguments about chores, maybe even a weekend trip. That night, Laura wrote in her journal, Step 4. Communication keeps love alive. Families don't fall apart from fights. They fall apart from silence.
It wasn't a perfect meeting. There were still eye rolls and teasing. But for the first time, they were building a habit that mattered more than anything, talking before breaking. And in that simple hour, the Miller family took another quiet step back toward happiness. From that family meeting came an idea that would slowly reshape the Millers' home. Sunday together. No work, no phones, no schedules. Just one day each week to be a family. At first, Mark was skeptical. You know, honey, weekends are when I catch up on work. Laura smiled. Exactly. You'll just have to catch up on us instead. The first Sunday started simple. Pancakes for breakfast, a walk in the park, and an evening movie with popcorn. But something about it felt healing. Sophie brought her stuffed penguin along on the walk. Ethan brought his camera, quietly snapping pictures of trees and sunlight. Mark held Laura's hand for the first time in months. Later, when they returned home, Sophie sprawled across the couch and said, Can we do this every Sunday? Ethan, surprising everyone, said, Yeah, I'm good with that. And so, the tradition began. Over the weeks, their Sundays became the heart of their family rhythm. Sometimes they picnicked, sometimes they played games, sometimes they just stayed home cooking together and talking about the week. It wasn't always perfect. There were arguments, late starts, and moments of stubborn silence, but each Sunday ended the same, with laughter echoing down the hallways instead of complaints. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Mark turned to Laura and said, I didn't realize how much I missed this. The noise, the mess, the us. Laura smiled. Me too. Feels like home again. Later, she opened her journal and wrote, Step 5. Traditions turn houses into homes. Happiness doesn't live in big events. It hides in small rituals we protect. And with each Sunday, the Millers built not just a routine, but a rhythm of love, gratitude, and presence that quietly began holding them together. By early spring, things in the Miller house felt lighter. There was laughter again, warmth again, but one thing still interrupted that peace: screens. At dinner, Mark's phone buzzed with work emails. Ethan scrolled TikTok between bites. Sophie watched YouTube videos at full volume. One night during dinner, Laura finally said, Okay, enough. I want to try something. Mark looked up from his phone. What kind of something? She took a deep breath. One weekend, no phones, no tablets, no screens, unless it's for music or family time. We'll call it a digital detox.
Ethan groaned immediately. You're kidding. Sophie gasped. Even Netflix? Laura nodded. Even Netflix. Mark raised an eyebrow. You realize we might not survive this, right? Laura laughed. We'll survive. We just have to remember how to talk to each other again. Friday night came. Every device went into a big glass bowl on the kitchen counter. The house felt eerily quiet. No pings, no notifications, no background noise. At first, everyone was restless. Mark kept glancing toward his phone. Ethan stared at the ceiling. Sophie wandered around complaining, "I'm bored." But by Saturday morning, something unexpected happened. Mark cooked breakfast, actual breakfast, with eggs, toast, and orange juice. Ethan joined him, cracking jokes about his dad's chef skills. Sophie helped Laura plant flowers in the backyard. That afternoon, they played cards, then took a walk around the neighborhood. No one missed their screens, not really. On Sunday night, when the detox ended, no one rushed to grab their phones. They just sat together, tired but content. Ethan said quietly, "That wasn't as bad as I thought." Mark grinned, high praise. Laura smiled, tucking that moment deep into her heart. That night, she wrote in her journal, Step 6, disconnect to reconnect. Happiness can't compete with constant distraction. Sometimes love needs silence to be heard. And for the first time in years, the Miller home didn't glow from screens. It glowed from something better. Togetherness. Spring arrived in Portland, bringing soft rain and the smell of blooming lilacs. Laura wanted to take advantage of it, to get everyone outside and working together. One Saturday morning, she announced over breakfast, "We're starting a garden in the backyard." Ethan blinked. "Like actual dirt and shovels?" Sophie squealed, "Can we plant strawberries?" Mark sighed good-naturedly. "I guess I'm in charge of heavy lifting." "Exactly," Laura grinned. By mid-morning, the Millers were in the yard, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty. Ethan dug shallow trenches, while Sophie dropped seeds and sang to them. Laura handled the flowers, and Mark, despite his initial resistance, turned out to be a natural with the shovel. The sun warmed their backs, birds chirped above, and laughter echoed between small arguments about who was watering too much or not enough. At one point, Sophie held up her muddy hands proudly. "Look, Mom, I made worms my friends." Ethan groaned, but even he was smiling. When they finally finished, they stepped back to look at their small, messy, but beautiful patch of soil. "It doesn't look like much now," Mark said. Laura smiled. "Neither did we a few months ago." Everyone went quiet, but in a good way, that kind of quiet that means everyone gets it. Over the next weeks, the garden became their shared ritual. Every morning before work, Mark watered the plants. Ethan took photos to track the growth. Sophie named each vegetable. And at night, Laura checked the leaves, whispering, "You're growing, all of you." That Sunday, she wrote in her journal, Step 7. Families grow like gardens. You don't force happiness. You plant consistency, water kindness, and wait for it to bloom. And as sprouts peeked through the soil, the Millers realized that they weren't just growing food, they were rebuilding roots. By early summer, the Millers' home had changed in small but powerful ways. There was less tension, more laughter, and even their garden was thriving, a symbol of how far they'd come.
But one thing still slipped sometimes: family dinners. Mark's work calls ran late. Ethan grabbed food and disappeared to his room, and Sophie sometimes ate early because she couldn't wait. So one evening, Laura stood in the kitchen and said, "Starting tonight, we're bringing back the dinner table rule." Ethan groaned. "Another rule?" Mark looked curious. "What rule is this?" Laura smiled. "No phones, no TV. No one leaves until everyone's done eating, and everyone shares one good thing from their day." Sophie clapped. "I like that." Ethan muttered, "Of course you do." That night, they all sat down, a real full dinner. At first, the conversation was awkward. Mark tried. So, any good memes today? And Ethan rolled his eyes. But then Sophie said proudly, my teacher said I read the best essay in class. Laura smiled. That's amazing, honey. What was it about? About penguins, Sophie said, beaming. They stay together forever, even in storms. Something about that made everyone smile. Mark shared next. I finally finished a tough project at work today. Didn't think I'd make it. Laura squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. When it was Ethan's turn, he shrugged. I got an A on my art project. Laura's eyes widened. You did? That's incredible. Why didn't you say anything? He looked down, embarrassed. I don't know. Didn't think anyone cared. The room went quiet. Then Mark said softly, we care, son. We really do. Ethan smiled, small but real. That night after dinner, no one rushed to leave the table. They just talked. And when they finally stood, Laura realized that happiness wasn't in the meal. It was in the moment. Later in her journal, she wrote, Step 8. The dinner table is sacred. It's where families learn to pause, listen, and remind each other that they still belong. And from that night on, the Miller family never ate separately again. By midsummer, the Miller family had found a rhythm that felt almost brand new. They laughed easily, they ate together most nights, and their small backyard garden was bursting with color. One Friday evening, Mark came home early, a rare sight, holding a handful of travel brochures. He grinned and said, I think it's time for a little adventure. How about a family road trip? Laura's eyes widened. Seriously? Seriously, he said. No laptops, no business calls, just us, a car, and the open road. Sophie jumped up and down. Can we go somewhere with animals? Ethan groaned, as long as it's not camping. Mark laughed. Deal. We'll go to the coast. Beaches, forests, maybe even a zoo on the way. That weekend, they packed the car with snacks, maps, and way too many blankets. The trip began awkwardly. Ethan sulked over the music choices. Sophie asked, Are we there yet? 10 times before the first hour, and Laura tried to keep the peace. But something started to shift around hour 3. Ethan began taking photos out the window. Sophie started singing old songs from the radio, and Mark loosened up behind the wheel. The car filled with laughter and crumbs. When they stopped at a diner for lunch, the waiter asked where they were headed. Mark smiled. Wherever the road takes us. That night they checked into a small seaside motel. The kids ran straight to the sand, while Mark and Laura walked behind them, holding hands. I forgot how good it feels, Mark said softly. That's what? Laura asked. To have everyone smiling at the same time. They spent the next few days exploring small towns, eating ice cream, chasing waves, and even letting Ethan drive for the first time on an empty stretch of road. When they finally drove home, tired but full of memories, Sophie fell asleep on Laura's shoulder and whispered, half dreaming, This was the best week ever.
That night, back in her own bed, Laura opened her journal and wrote, Step 9. Leave the house to find your home again. Time away from routine reminds us why we chose each other in the first place. The Millers didn't just come back with souvenirs. They came back closer. A few weeks after their road trip, the Miller family returned to their everyday rhythm. Dinners together, Sunday rituals, and that thriving backyard garden. Life felt steady again, but happiness, as Laura knew, wasn't a one-time victory. It needed maintenance. Then came one of those long, gray Portland weekends. Non-stop rain, thunder, and cabin fever. Sophie's soccer game was canceled. Mark's project deadline was moved up, so he had to work from home. Ethan sulked about missing plans with his friends. By Saturday afternoon, tension filled the air. Sophie whined, Ethan slammed doors. Mark sighed loudly at his laptop.
and Laura stood in the kitchen wondering if all their progress was slipping away. She took a deep breath, grabbed a stack of board games from the closet, and said, "Okay, everyone, family meeting. Rain has trapped us inside, so let's make the best of it." Ethan muttered, "Not this again." Laura smiled. "Yes, this again." They spread out on the floor, ordered pizza, and played charades. At first it was awkward. No one wanted to be that silly. But then Sophie acted out dinosaur dancing, and everyone burst into laughter so hard that even Mark joined in. An hour later, the living room floor was covered in empty pizza boxes and laughter echoes. Mark leaned back and said, "You know what? I think rainy days were made for this." Ethan, still laughing, said, "Can we do it again next weekend, even if it's sunny?" Laura looked at them, wet socks on the floor, crumbs everywhere, smiles on faces, and realized happiness wasn't about avoiding bad days. It was about choosing joy inside them. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Step 10. Happiness isn't perfect weather. It's learning to dance in the storm together." A happy family isn't one without problems. It's one that remembers to laugh through them. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the Millers stayed warm. Not because of the heater, but because they had each other. August came and went in a blur of busy schedules. Mark had a big project at work. Ethan started football practice. And Laura's bakery orders doubled. Amid all the rushing, one special day slipped through the cracks. Sophie's birthday. Not entirely forgotten, they remembered, of course, but the celebration was rushed. Mark picked up a cake last minute. Laura wrapped a gift between deliveries. Ethan barely made it home in time for dinner. Sophie smiled through it all, but Laura could see it, the disappointment hiding behind her polite grin. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Laura sat on the couch feeling awful. "We didn't celebrate her, Mark," she said quietly. "We just checked it off the list." Mark sighed, guilt crossing his face. "You're right. We're slipping back into old habits." The next morning, Laura woke up with a plan. She tiptoed into Sophie's room, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Get dressed, sweetheart. We're having a do-over birthday." By noon, the backyard was transformed. Balloons tied to the fence, a handmade sign reading Sophie's Special Day 2.0, and cupcakes from Laura's bakery. Ethan set up a little music speaker, and Mark grilled hot dogs like it was the 4th of July. When Sophie came outside, her face lit up. "You remembered again," she squealed. Mark knelt and said, "We didn't just remember, we wanted to do it right." They spent the afternoon playing games, laughing, and dancing. Even the neighbors peeked over the fence to join the fun. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Sophie hugged them both tightly. This was the best birthday ever, even better than the first one.
Laura smiled, tears in her eyes. Sometimes the best memories come from second chances. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Step 11. Family happiness means slowing down for the small hearts among us. No job, no deadline, no chore is worth more than showing someone they matter." The Millers learned that day that happiness wasn't built on getting everything right. It was built on caring enough to fix what you got wrong. A few weeks after Sophie's birthday redo, life was good again, but one Friday night reminded the Millers that happiness needs constant care. Mark came home late from work, exhausted. Ethan had just flunked a math quiz and didn't want to talk. Sophie was cranky because her class pet hamster had been taken home by another student. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The sound of forks scraping plates filled the air. Laura looked around the table, slumped shoulders, tired faces, everyone staring at their food. Something in her heart ached. Without a word, she stood up,
walked to the piano in the living room and started playing softly, a slow, familiar tune from when the kids were younger. Sophie perked up first. "Mom, that's our bedtime song." Laura smiled. "It used to be, but I think we all need it tonight." Ethan rolled his eyes but listened anyway. After a moment, Mark put down his fork, exhaled deeply, and joined her, humming the melody, off-key. Sophie giggled. "Dad, you're so bad at that." He grinned. "Then come help me." Ethan laughed too, and before long, the quiet tension melted into soft laughter. When the song ended, Laura turned back toward the table. "We don't have to talk all the time," she said gently, "but when we're together, let's be together." They finished dinner slowly after that, still tired, still imperfect, but present. Later that night, Mark came into the kitchen while Laura was washing dishes. He wrapped his arms around her and said quietly, "I forget sometimes how small moments fix big days." Laura smiled. "That's all family is, a collection of small moments that we choose not to miss." Then she wrote in her journal, "Step 12. Happiness isn't constant laughter, it's comfort in the quiet. A happy family knows when to speak, when to listen, and when to simply be." That night, as rain began to fall outside, the Miller home stayed softly lit and warm, not because the day had been perfect, but because they had turned its silence into peace. Autumn arrived with crisp air, golden leaves, and school routines back in full swing. The Miller family was busy again, but this time balanced. One Sunday morning, as they were having breakfast, Laura looked around at her family. Sophie doodling on a napkin, Ethan texting a friend, and Mark reading the newspaper. And she thought, "We've come so far, but I don't want us to lose this again." She cleared her throat. "I have an idea." Mark looked up. "Uh-oh, here we go." Ethan smirked. "Another Project Home Rule?" Laura laughed. "Not a rule, a promise." She pulled out her journal and tore out a clean page. "At the start of this year, we were falling apart. Now we laugh again, eat together, and even argue better. But happiness fades if we don't protect it. So, let's make a family promise, one we all sign." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Like a contract?" "Exactly," Laura said, handing her a pen. On the page, she wrote in big, careful letters, "The Miller Family Promise." 1. We will listen before we shout. 2. We will say sorry when we're wrong. 3. We will make time to laugh, eat, and rest together. 4. We will protect our Sundays. 5. We will choose kindness even when it's hard.
Mark nodded slowly. "That's actually really good." Ethan smiled. "Even number 2? "Especially number 2, Laura teased. They all signed it, even Sophie, who drew a penguin next to her name for good luck. Mark framed the paper and hung it in the hallway, right above the family photos, "so we see it every day," he said. That evening, as they watched a movie together, Laura looked at the framed promise and felt something deep and sure inside her chest, peace built on purpose. That night she wrote, Step 13. Happy families don't happen by accident. They're built by people who choose love, again and again, even when life gets loud. The Millers weren't perfect. They still forgot things, got impatient, and argued, but now they had something stronger than perfection, a shared promise to keep coming back to each other. The Miller family promise held strong for months, until one Thursday evening when everything unraveled in the span of 10 minutes. Mark came home late again, tired and irritable. Laura had been juggling orders all day at the bakery and was equally drained. Ethan was behind on a school project, and Sophie had spilled juice all over the kitchen floor. Tension was already thick when Mark walked in, saw the mess, and muttered, "Can't we keep this place clean for one day?"
Laura, exhausted, shot back, "You could help once in a while instead of complaining." That was all it took. Mark raised his voice. "I work 10 hours a day to keep this house running. And I run this house. We're supposed to be a team, Mark." Ethan groaned, grabbed his backpack, and stomped upstairs. Sophie started to cry. Within minutes, the laughter that had filled their home vanished into cold silence. Later that night, Mark sat alone in the living room, staring at the framed Miller family promise on the wall. The words, "Choose kindness, even when it's hard," seemed to stare right back at him. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I broke our own rule." Laura walked in quietly, eyes red. They stood there for a moment, two tired parents who loved deeply but forgot how to show it sometimes. "I shouldn't have yelled," Mark said softly. "And I shouldn't have either. We both had bad days, but they shouldn't have to pay for them." They sat down and talked, really talked. No blame, no shouting, just honesty. The next morning, they gathered Ethan and Sophie before school. Mark said, "We messed up last night. We forgot what we promised, but we're trying again." Sophie nodded. Ethan gave a small smile. "At least you admit it." That night, Laura wrote, "Step 14. Happiness isn't about never fighting, it's about how you fix it. Families that learn to say I was wrong last longer than those that try to be right." The next day, the laughter returned. Softer, humbler, but real. And that's when Laura knew. Even strong families stumble. What matters most is that they stand back up together. 2 weeks after that fight, the Millers were back in sync. The air in the house was lighter again, until one Saturday morning when Laura got a phone call that made her pause mid-batter. She hung up, turned to the family, and said, "Guess who's coming to visit?" Mark frowned. "Don't say your mother." Laura laughed. "Yes, my mother. For the whole weekend." Ethan groaned. "Grandma June? The one who still calls me Pumpkin?" Sophie clapped. "I love Grandma June. She tells the best stories." That afternoon, Grandma June arrived, suitcase in hand, full of hugs and opinions. Within minutes, she'd commented on the clutter, corrected Mark's grilling technique, and asked Ethan why he was so tall and grumpy.
A few months later, autumn crept back into Portland. Golden trees, chilly air, and the familiar smell of cinnamon and rain. The Miller house was full of the usual routine until one Friday afternoon when Sophie burst through the front door waving a crumpled flyer. "Guess what? I got the lead in our school play," she shouted, breathless. Laura dropped her mixing spoon. "That's amazing! What's the play?" Sophie grinned proudly. "The Little Lighthouse. I'm playing the lighthouse keeper who saves the ships." Mark smiled. "Well, that sounds just like you, keeping everyone safe." As the days went by, Sophie practiced her lines in every corner of the house. Ethan pretended to be annoyed, but secretly helped her memorize. Laura made snacks during late-night rehearsals, and Mark promised, no matter what, he'd take the day off for the performance. When the big day came, the auditorium was packed. Kids in handmade costumes ran backstage, teachers adjusted props, and parents shuffled for seats. As the lights dimmed, Laura squeezed Mark's hand. "I think she's nervous." Mark smiled. "She's got this." When Sophie walked onto the stage, her voice trembled at first, then grew stronger with every line. By the final scene, her small voice filled the room. "Even in the darkest night, the light still shines if we keep it burning together." The audience erupted in applause. Ethan whistled so loud everyone turned to look. Afterward, Sophie ran into her parents' arms, tears of pride in her eyes. "Did you like it?" Laura knelt, hugging her tight. "Sweetheart, we loved it. You lit up the whole room." That night, as the family celebrated with ice cream, Mark raised his spoon like a toast. to the light that keeps this family together, our little lighthouse." Sophie giggled. "And my assistant, Ethan." Ethan groaned. "I'm never living this down." Later, when the kids were asleep, Laura opened her journal and wrote, "Step 17. Happiness is watching your children shine and knowing you helped keep their light alive." She smiled as she closed the book, feeling warmth in her chest. That night, before turning off the lamp, Mark whispered, "She really is our light." Laura nodded softly. "She is, but I think we all are now." As November settled in, the Millers prepared for their first real Thanksgiving together in years, one filled not with obligation, but with gratitude. Laura woke up early to the smell of coffee and the sound of soft music playing from the kitchen. Mark was already up, basting the turkey and humming off-key. Ethan wandered in, still half asleep. "You're cooking, Dad? Is the world ending?" Mark chuckled. "Miracles happen, son. It's Thanksgiving." By noon, the house was alive. The oven ticking, Sophie setting the table with handmade decorations, Ethan chopping vegetables under protest, and Laura floating between laughter and reminders. But this time, it wasn't chaos. It was family noise, warm, imperfect, alive. When everything was finally ready, they sat down at the table. The aroma of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filling the room, Laura looked around at the faces she loved most and said, "Before we eat, let's do something different. Everyone share one thing they're thankful for, something that isn't a thing." Sophie went first. "I'm thankful for our family nights, even the boring ones." Ethan smirked. "I'm thankful for not failing math, and I guess for us getting along better." Mark smiled. "I'm thankful for second chances, and for you three reminding me what matters most." Laura paused for a long moment before speaking. "I'm thankful for this. This noise, these smiles, the mess, the love. A year ago we were all here, but we weren't together. Now we are." For a moment no one said anything. Then Sophie reached out her small hand and linked it with Ethan's. He didn't pull away. Mark reached across the table and took Laura's hand. "We did it, huh?" She smiled through tears. "No, we're doing it." They bowed their heads together and said a quiet prayer. Not for more, not for less, but simply for this. That night, as the candles burned low, Laura wrote in her journal, "Step 18. Gratitude turns an ordinary table into a sacred space. Happiness grows when we stop counting what's missing and start cherishing what stayed." Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, but inside, the Miller home glowed, not from the lights, but from love that had been fought for, rebuilt, and finally, fully felt. Winter arrived quietly that year. Snow dusting the rooftops, lights twinkling along the streets, and laughter echoing faintly from every window. In the Miller house, everything felt different from the year before. The same walls that once held silence now held stories. The same table that once saw arguments now saw warmth. One chilly evening, the family gathered around the fireplace after dinner. Sophie was building a puzzle on the rug. Ethan was strumming his old guitar, Mark was reading, and Laura, as always, was writing in her journal. After a few minutes, Sophie looked up and asked, "Mom, what are you always writing about?" Laura smiled. "About us. About how we learn to be happy again." Ethan smirked. "You mean all those rules you made us follow?" Laura laughed. "Yes, those too, but also everything in between. The hard parts, the fights, the funny dinners, the do-over birthdays." Mark closed his book. "We should let us read it one day." Laura hesitated, then smiled softly. "Maybe someday, but I can tell you the ending right now." They all looked up. It's about how happiness isn't a place we find. It's something we build together. It's the patience when we're tired, the laughter after the arguments,
the meals we share, and the love we choose every day. Ethan nodded slowly. So basically, we're all the story. Exactly, Laura said. Each one of us. Sophie leaned against her mom's shoulder. Then I want to help write the next one. Mark smiled and wrapped an arm around them both. We all will. The fire crackled softly, filling the quiet with warmth. Outside, the world was cold and still. Inside, it was home.